So, Marc, it's a pleasure to meet you. Welcome to the Free Your Inner Guru podcast.
Thanks, Laura. Good to meet you too.
Your book, Seven Practices of a Mindful Leader, comes from your vast experience. You've had a lot of different environments that you've been able to work with people on leadership, everything from a Zen monastery into the corporate world with Google. Can you share some of your story and what that journey was like for you?
You know, it's interesting that just responding to that, I actually feel like the vast majority of my leadership experience has been in the world in between the Google and the Zen monastery. It's been wearing the CEO hat of a few different organizations. But yes, let's see. Now I'm wondering what your question was as I went
no,
down.
that's okay.
Well, I mean,
how did you come into leadership as your thing? It's such a hot topic these days, and I'd love to try to situate our conversation, in our current leadership climate.
Yeah. I think oddly enough, the way I came into it was through the spiritual door, through the contemplative door. I found myself as a young Zen student, being in charge of a Zen Monastery Kitchen was really, I felt like, my first real sort of deep dive into leadership. Noticing that my job was to set a tone, create culture. This was a kitchen that in the summertime might have 15 people, might even have 20 people, and there was it was a stressful, high pressured environment. It wasn't what people might think of as a Zen. It was within in the bowels of the Zen monastery, but there were high expectations of producing really good quality, beautiful, healthy food for 70 or 80 overnight guests in the summertime who came to Tassajara, partly because of the reputation of its culinary delights. So I learned a lot. That was real, a real potent experience. And then 2 years later, I found myself as the director of the Zen Center monastery, of Tassajara Monastery. And that was even kind of higher stakes, kind of overseeing, the entire operation and being responsible for the overall culture, as well as budgets and people and all of that. And I was surprised to find myself in those roles. I was surprised how much I enjoyed it, that it was something very, I loved the challenge of leading and managing, and how much I learned about myself and the constant, I learned a lot about, apologizing for, from hurting other people's feelings, to not meeting their expectations, to not meeting my own expectations, but saw the potency of that role. And also interesting, in the midst of kind of mindfulness practice, spiritual practice. And I wondered, why isn't everyone integrating these practices? It made so much sense to me. And somehow I decided this was the path that I wanted to take my life. And I felt like I needed more training in the business side of things, and went right from my time at the Zen Center to get an MBA degree at New York University. And then I ended up starting and running a publishing company that I ran for 15 years.
And I mean, I imagine when you entered the monastery as that young man, you had no idea what would lay out in front of you there.
No, not at all. I mean, I was, I think of myself as I was young, I was naive, I was just super excited about the opportunity to practice mindfulness, to practice Zen in this case, to live in community with like-minded people. I had no idea that work and leadership was going to be such a major part of my training and my path.
Before we dive into some of the 7 practices, how do you see in today's world the importance of this work? And I'm asking this for me in terms of sometimes I feel discouraged in terms of what we see as the prominent and literally dominant style of leadership and the messaging around success. And I sometimes, will have my head in my hands thinking, like, does it really matter? And then I pick up a book like yours and I read somebody else writing things like, this is the responsibility of the leader is to create community and connection, and that this is the most important thing right now. And so I'm curious about how you've seen things shift, or have they shifted, or is it shifted, or is it just a bigger of expression of what was always there in dominant success and political culture?
There's so many different ways I could go with responding to that, but I'll go with something that will perhaps date this interview, but maybe in a good way. Yesterday, I watched the Bob Mueller interview for a couple of hours as he was in Washington, D.C. in front of members of Congress. And, he was so much, not the way, he was very low key, tremendous, not a showman, the opposite of a showman, tremendous humility. My favorite moment in that interview was when he was being attacked for being biased and hiring biased people, and that's when he could see he had it, and he's looking around and he said, "I've been doing this work for more than 25 years, and I've never once in anyone that I've hired asked people about their political views. I hire people because of their skills and competency, and most of all, I hire people for," and then it's almost like he said, integrity. And he said this word integrity, and they, as the camera went around, Congress, I thought half of the people were going to break, or kind of melt or something. And that he was kind of providing a word and a basis for leadership that can be forgotten, which is that leadership is essentially about integrity. And by integrity, I think that means, being an integrated human being, integrating, vision, sense of urgency with heart, with honesty, with morals and all those things. So, in terms of what you're saying, that yes, it's hard not to be discouraged if you're paying attention. Again, something I often quote Wendell Berry in moments like this, his quote that, be joyful though you've considered all the facts. And
oh, that's lovely.
So there's something to me about like facing the reality and seeing, there's so much to be discouraged about, but there's also, I think, so much to be encouraged about as well. And yeah, this kind of, if we keep coming back to this question around integrity and what does it mean, and I think in some way there's a real longing and need and connection that we have with integrity, and it's so easy to if anything, the a lot of the leadership we're seeing now is almost like the opposite of integrity, and you can see it can have results. And in fact, it can whip people up But I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable. And I think I think leadership without integrity is damaging to human beings and I think we're seeing to our planet.
At the same time as we're seeing this, we're also seeing more and more people turn towards or be open to mindfulness.
Yes.
And this is where the integration of, of having read your book and, just to bring the listeners in, like knowing that you've been at this for decades, mindfulness and leadership. So it's not something that you've just put on the mantle now. But more and more people are gravitating towards it. And I'm finding it was inevitable in my own practice and in my own coaching and speaking that I bring in mindfulness, even when people are resistant to it. I'm finding more and more they're willing to try. And it might be because they feel like they might be losing it or getting lost in the energy or in the dynamics around, and we need to come back to something. And at the end of the day, we come back to ourselves first, which is something that's been interesting to integrate.
Yeah, well, I think we all want to be fully engaged, connected. It's not like we want to be stressed and running around like crazy or chasing after that next win or dollar, and we all I think want a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility, meaning. I think we want a sense of doing work that matters. This is, I think, it's interesting. I was saying, I kind of identify myself as a social entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur in the sense that I like creating things. I like starting things. I've started a few different companies. And by social entrepreneur, I think business as a force for solving real problems and doing things that matter. And I find whether I'm in Google or any large company, the world is now, many people are identifying as social entrepreneurs, which I think is a really, really interesting trend that we're seeing. That even though what gets the headlines are the awful, out of integrity things that people are doing at many high levels. Underneath that, I think there's this enormous movement that we're seeing toward a kind of, social entrepreneurship, leading with integrity. Again, it's funny. I notice I even have some hesitation about using the mindfulness word because I think it means so many different things to people, and it evokes so many different ideas. But again, my book.
Did you?
Yeah. Well, my
only I'm holding up the book to say, well, it's called 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader.
My publisher made me do it,
Like, Mark, you need to bring this forward.
Yeah. I actually, it's funny that in truth, this book had many different titles before this title that didn't have the word mindfulness in it. And it was so funny. It's one of the things I love about writing and book projects is I like to assemble a team. It's part of people ask me, how do you manage to write books? And one is that I can't do it alone. I assemble a team. I listen to them. I make promises. And I actually, I had just left my role as being the CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And I finished the book, and I went off on a 3-month retreat at back to my roots, back to Tassajara Zen Mountain Center. And and the only call that I made in 3 months during that retreat, other than to my family, was to my publisher, just checking in to make sure that everything was okay. And in fact, I'm not even going to tell you what the previous title was. Actually, I think one of the titles, the book started with, it was called Reframing Your Life.
Ah.
And anyhow, that call with the publisher, I was just making sure everything was good with the manuscript, and they said, no, like we've been meeting and talking, and we want this book to be called 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. And I blurted out, I was actually a little kind of grumpy about it, and I said, and I suppose you want the subtitle to be Lessons from Google and a Zen Monastery Kitchen. And you're like, yes, exactly. I said, I was just kidding.
I think it's great because, somebody has to say it. So why not you?
Yeah, no, I agree. And in some way, I think part of my, my mission in life, and why not bring it out in my writing, is to ground mindfulness, to show that, what I think the depth of it, the breadth of it, as well as to take them, on the one hand to demystify it, on the other hand to completely show the mystery of it, both. So to talk about mindfulness practice, to make it accessible without losing its depth and without losing its roots is I feel like part of my own life mission.
And the more I talk to people like you, and a couple of episodes, or probably a few episodes by the time this is released, Mark Coleman, the more I go down this path, and I consider myself fortunate. I was introduced to mindfulness over 10 years ago now. And it really was, it had such a practical application in my life. It allowed me to function entirely differently. And so it had become just like realizing that, that I'm, although not embracing, having been brought up as a Catholic in my family, a deeply spiritual person. The two went hand in hand with me. But as meditation and mindfulness have been brought into the popular culture, they can become diluted. Or there's this, I find a lot of people feel like they're just doing it wrong, and they're hard on themselves for having a busy mind, and then they stop. And it becomes one more thing to pile on as far as this is where I'm, insufficient or not good enough. And so as people go through this book, it's very, very practical. And it starts with, loving the work, or love the work, and doing the work. So I thought that this is a really great opportunity to get into what is the work.
Yeah. Simply stated, the work is the work of self-awareness and helping others. And this is the work, and there's, and again, then I think kind of opening up this, self-awareness is a very more accessible. It's a language that comes from emotional intelligence, or language that's been around for thousands of years in the Western culture. So it's interesting, this marrying this kind of idea from Western culture about self-awareness with more Eastern culture, the word mindfulness. And tremendous, again, these are, it's essentially I think of it as knowing yourself and going beyond yourself, right? So again, it's this beautiful teaching. Again, I think these are teachings from Eastern and Western spirituality, and also I think these more and more are teachings of leadership. That leadership, the essential quality is self-awareness, and an essential quality of self-awareness is mentoring others, coaching others, listening to others. In fact, this was one of the core findings of this kind of year-long study that Google did called Google Oxygen, where they wanted to know what are the core qualities of great leadership. And their assumption was, which is great, I love this about Google, their assumption was that leadership doesn't matter. That what matters is engineering and products.
Ah,
And they really, that was their bias that they went into it with. And yet, after collecting data, they discovered that actually leadership does matter. And what matters most are those three qualities: mentoring, coaching, and listening. And again, I think that the connection with those and knowing, loving the work. So it's loving the work of self-awareness. And then you referred to the second practice of actually doing the work, right? That it's not just reading about it or daydreaming about this stuff, that we actually have to have some kind of a practice. To something, Laura, that was coming up for me as you were talking was, I think so much of what's challenging for people in this whole realm, and you mentioned like it so easily gets watered down, and I think it gets watered down, well, for many reasons, but one, people leave out practicing with community, and they often leave out the importance of having a teacher or a coach or a mentor, like working with someone. I think there's great wisdom to the it's a Buddhist framework, right? That there's the teacher, there's the teaching, and there's the community. And I think somehow in today's world we think, who needs a teacher and who needs a community? And I'm more and more upfront that so many people who want to have a daily meditation practice struggle with it. And my response is, try sitting with others. I don't think meditation was ever meant to be an individual sport.
oh, wow.
It was really meant to be a group sport. And of course, many of us don't have any choice but to, on a day-to-day basis. I sit by myself daily, but once a week I sit with a group. I sit with a group here in my hometown in Mill Valley, and it is a qualitatively different experience. And in some way, I think even sitting once a week with others can inform one's daily practice.
Do you think that has fallen away or gets dropped because, this is more of a statement than a question, I think, because in Western culture, we are groomed to be that lone wolf, that success is that, rising to the top yourself and individual pursuit, individual reward.
Yeah.
It never would have occurred to me, unless I hadn't discovered meditation within a group setting.
Yeah. Well, people are often surprised when I share that for the first 10 years of my meditation practice, I don't think I ever sat with less than 50 people. And there was something so odd about this sitting alone. And in some way, the part of the potency of group practice, and you can really see it, you really see it if you do, I could never do like, a 1 day or 7 day meditation retreat. You couldn't do it by yourself. It's the power and energy of doing it with others. And then you get to experience that a big part of the practice is that you're not just sitting for yourself, you're actually sitting in part to encourage others, that your intention, your effort is encouraging to others, and that you are literally being supported and encouraged by others. And that this idea of knowing yourself and going beyond yourself shifts from an idea into an experience.
Mm.
And I think this is, again, I think this is a big part of, mindfulness practice in general. For example, it's easy to say, right, life is short, right? You should live as though your life is short. Everyone would say, oh yeah, that's, I've got that greeting card. But how do you live it? How do you bring that sense of that life is short into how you live your life? And again, I think this is, in part, meditation practice, mindfulness practice is, it's a way of being practice. It's a practice of embodying what I think we know, this knowing ourselves, going beyond ourselves, life is short, connection, meaning, and bringing it into our experience, our day-to-day experience.
And that's another way to look at that word integration, about bringing it into, it's integrating parts of yourself, but integrating it into your community and your day-to-day experience.
Yeah. And also, I've also been, funny, I've been, my group met last night, my Wednesday night Mill Valley Zen meditation group. And I've been talking about the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And at the basis of his work, or one of the things at the base of his work, is how we humans have become separate from nature, and therefore kind of separate from ourselves. So when we talk about self-awareness, again, it's easy to, we have these ideas, and I think we take those words like self-awareness or mindfulness, and we put them into little boxes, and oh yeah, got that. But but what I love about this model of the hero's journey, or the heroine's journey, someone brought up last night, wondering, wait a minute, this is very male oriented. So yeah, it is, but I think it's just as relevant.
Oh, don't you?
For women. And again, it may be.
I 100% agree. So you're in a hero's journey friendly environment right here.
It may be, the language may be different, the symbols may be different, but I think it's the human journey of the return to ourselves, the return to integrity, the return to no separation between the natural world and that we are nature, and that we have this great ability and curse to be able to see ourselves as separate from it. And this is part of this sense of returning to the source. And again, I think this also is about leadership. And Star Wars was based on in fact, someone asked me last night, they said, gee, the hero's journey seems so much about the self. What about helping others? And my response was, the hero's journey is that you develop yourself so you can save the world. Star Wars and the journey is about saving the world, but that you need to find yourself, and then you need to find the source, or the force. May the source be with you. May the force be with you for saving the world.
And part of this was, this is such a wonderful opportunity to be able to hold this conversation. Part of the hero's journey, because this is something that I had to look at very closely in looking at my own life and some of the things that have happened as as trying to find a framework for, for feeling a call to something. And part of that hero's journey is facing tremendous challenge of some kind, refusing the call, and then after going out into the wilderness, coming back like the knights of old to the community, and their job when they were older was to teach based on their lessons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's so valuable, especially for when people feel like they are in challenge, that there's a jewel there to be discovered, mm-hmm. if only we'll be open to it.
Mm-hmm. I would also, Laura, again, just to play here in this territory for a bit more, I think that you could look at each period of meditation as the hero's journey, right? That you start with some call, like, why would you do this? You have some call, and then it's not unusual to the next process is, get me out of here. Like, why am I? It's so nice out, or I have so many things to do, or look. So there is that refusing the call, and then there's moving on to maybe feeling the support of others, or that I'm doing this in a way for my relationship life, or I'm feeling the support of others, and then there's the various battles, which might be sleep, or thinking mind, or strong feelings, or any kind of any number of battles, and then yeah, and within that finding one's power and path. And then every time we sit, we have to, how do we integrate that? How do we find our way back to our lives? And then there's this beautiful returning to the marketplace, returning to the ordinary. So starting and ending with the ordinary world. And the Zen practice summarizes this in 3 lines. The Zen talks about, says mountains are mountains when we start the practice, and then mountains are not mountains is like some transformation. And then the 3rd line is mountains are mountains, but of course they've been transformed, but it's this ordinary sense. So it's the hero's journey in 3 lines. I like the simplicity of Zen practice.
The brevity and the depth at the same time.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about how somebody who's listening and wants to deepen their practice, or wants to begin a practice, where can we jump in and recognize opportunities or signals that we need to be more mindful and make it a priority?
Yeah, I think it's just turning oneself over to paying attention, and actually noticing what your experience is. And I think, for some people that can be through writing, through the act of writing can help unpack experience. Sometimes it's through having conversations with, again, whether it's with a coach or a Zen teacher or a therapist, or just like there's something about expressing one's words and being in dialogue with another person, or with a small group. Reading, like actually entering, I think of reading as a great way of entering the minds of others. So reading books, whether it's like mine or Mark Coleman's, or I find I go back every year and reread Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha as one of my and again, what's beautiful is that it's everywhere. Once you enter this practice of being curious about your experience and the experience of others, everything is a learning experience. And you certainly, I mean, again, this was one of the real big ones for me in being in a leadership role, was paying attention to how my words and actions and presence influenced others, and being really curious about when we were working well as a team and when we weren't, when people were feeling in connection with me and when they weren't, and being this beautiful aspiration toward in leadership of being transparent, and at the same time driving a vision and working with change, and being someone who people felt they could rely on. So I think of leadership and relationships and family. These are the advanced practices. I think yeah.
When other people are involved.
Yes. Yeah. And again, I think this is one of the things that was tremendously satisfying and wonderful about the many years that I spent living in community. Again, that was not, just like leadership and community were not things I thought. I just wanted to sit meditation. I just thought I was going to practice meditation when I started sitting at the Zen Center. But then I found myself living in community with other people, and then I found myself working and leading people. Was like, oh, this is practice. Practice is how we practice with others in our lives and in our work.
In your book, it's bringing to mind, you describe practice as beneficial because, one, you improve your skills, and two, you integrate the mindfulness aspect of it, because it's constantly being tested in some way.
Yeah, and maybe to go back to the second practice of do the work, I kind of talk about kind of what I frame as two big buckets of practice: the kind of dedicated practice and integrated practice. And again, these things go back and forth, but there is something about actually having that time when we can step out of the demands of our lives and just sit, just write, there is, I think, something very potent that happens in this mind, body, heart when we have that. I think there's something quite profound about meditation practice, and then there's the integrated practice of, okay, now how do we bring that into our lives? And then, of course, it's then we bring our integrated practice into when we sit down. Our whole life is there to be noticed, experienced, processed, and let go of in some way.
One of the things that seemed counterintuitive to me at first was a third practice of don't be an expert. Mm-hmm. Given that this is, we know now because you've shared that it wasn't always going to be titled for leaders, but in a leadership practice, or interesting, I just said leadership practice. So leadership is a practice, apparently. But this idea of having the beginner mind and openness and curiosity versus, the know-it-all leader.
Right. Well, interesting that that these practices emerged out of training a group of Google engineers how to be mindfulness teachers. So one of the core, right? So core values, practices, right? If you want to be a mindfulness teacher, and I think the same applies to practicing mindfulness, loving the work, doing the work, and then letting go of any idea of being an expert. That when it comes to when it comes to relationships, when it comes to self-awareness, and I would say when it comes to leadership, right? Good luck with anybody who thinks they're going to, be an expert in these things. Partly because of, the vast mysteriousness of human beings, and the fact that everything is always changing, right? If you might have it figured out and clarity in this moment, and now there's this moment, so so I think it's just a critical practice, this practice of curiosity. Now, again, I think, of course, I want my, whether it's my surgeon or my dentist or my car mechanic, I want them to be, as expert as possible. And just like, so it's not we can strive. It's not about, we can strive for expertise. We can strive to be great surgeons or leaders. And it's paradoxical in the sense that part of being expert is realizing how important it is to let go and to be curious and to not know. And even for a surgeon or a car mechanic, it's like sometimes things will present themselves that you've never seen before. And this is a good time to not rely on what you know, but to have a flexible, open mind in those instances.
Right, because the consequences of imposing the solution that you're attached to.
Yeah. It's a little bit like, I think of a friend of mine who's a doctor wrote a book about when he was training to, he was in training as a surgeon, and he was noticing that in this instance, these group of doctors were not really paying attention. They were kind of doing surgery on autopilot, and things were not going well. And he was noticing, because he was a resident, and so so much of this thing we call mindfulness practice is this shift from autopilot to paying attention, being open. And again, this is in a way a core practice of not being an expert is like getting off of autopilot.
It can be applied to just about any situation gone wrong where there's a leader. I think that's where, if we get away from realizing that people have inherent wisdom, and even when you are the leader, if we're not stopping to listen, to pay attention, to take in consideration the sentiment and experience of others, because it's not always about like the technically right or wrong thing.
Yeah, and again, having the courage to even wonder, what am I missing? What are my blind spots? I mentioned last night, in my group, I'm talking about the hero's journey, and a woman raised her hand and said, this feels very masculine to me. What about women? And I had to stop and say, clearly I have my own bias here. I'm in this particular body, mm-hmm. and I'm super curious. Like, maybe there's maybe this model works, but maybe there's a whole nother model that is more relevant, more powerful, more integral to others. And let's talk about that too.
Mm-hmm. I was actually, just to that point, I was having some conversations around the hero's journey a few months ago, and did some Googling around, and there are people who have spent some energy defining a heroine's journey.
Sure.
And if I recall, the difference, was around, I think there was a really a strong emphasis on healing in the journey versus teaching.
Right.
And something to go back to for sure.
Yes.
Because there's got to be value there. Your seventh practice is keep making it simpler. How can we make things simpler, Marc? By we, that's the inclusive we.
Yes. Well, what's interesting that, in framing these practices, I call the first several practices are about kind of investigate. The next set of practices are around connecting. And this last practice I've put under the heading of integrate. So we're coming full circle back to integrity and integrate. Yeah. So in some way that, that's it, the way to make things simple is to find, is instead of everything being separate, is to somehow drive everything into one thing. And, and in some way, there's different ways to think of that. One that I talk about is by keep coming back to what's most important, right? What's most important. And it's easy to, to think that there's 10 or 20 things that are important, and that may be, but like right now, what has to be, where do we want to put our energy and our focus now, today, in this part of my life? What am I choosing? What am I defining as the most important thing right now? The other way that I, and I think in a way this is the gift of the teaching of mindfulness practice, and even what I love about the language of the hero's journey is just that phrase, right? Journey, one to see that our life is a journey, and that we are on a path, and two, that we are by framing it as the hero's journey, it kind of highlights a sense of how much our lives matter, how much our choices matter, how much our experience matter.
I think that's such a strong point. I was just at I go to a writing group once a month, and I had lapsed for a while and have returned to it the last couple of months. And I brought a story, and it was a story from when I was in my late teens, and I read it, and then we had a conversation afterwards about, does sharing these stories matter? Like, what difference does it make? And it came around to, the current culture. It's in the current culture, it's easy to feel like you're not different enough or marginalized enough or somehow enough. Again, there's a real theme of not enough, or maybe famous enough is one of the things. And we got into a big conversation about how important it is for each of us to share our stories, because each story helps the next person share the story, and not be keeping them sort of in the dark, away from where they can help the next 18-year-old who went through something similar. Mm-hmm. And that was a mindset shift in between, well, what does that story mean to me anymore? It doesn't really mean much.
Totally. I think,
but it's meaningful out there.
Yeah. I think this is, when I talk about the value of community, so much of it is hearing our own and each other's stories, and sharing stories and learning from story. It also came up for me, there's also this, and coming back to this practice about keep making it simpler. I'm reminded of, in the early days of when I was just creating my last organization, the, and that can be a really chaotic and hectic time when you're creating, taking an idea and making it into a company. And at the time, I think, I had a handful of employees, and we were kind of doing a lot of experimenting and testing, and my assistant came up to me and I could see was really stressed, and he said, "Mark, I feel like I'm just, juggling. I'm juggling so many balls, and I'm afraid, I'm going to drop one, and I'm not sure what I should do." And I looked at him and said, "Let's change the metaphor. How would it feel instead of juggling balls, if you were planting a lot of seeds?" And just that, so just changing this story. Because when we're juggling balls, life is hectic and things are going to fall and break, and but we can do the same activity and reimagine it, tell the story of planting seeds. Then, I'm planting a lot of seeds, and I've got to take care of these things, and things are going to grow, and some things may not grow, and I'll water. So there's more. It feels like more of a connected and healing story. So I think in part of keep making it simpler is to notice what story you are telling about your life and yourself, even, and that and again, it's not like this is completely in control, in our own control, and it's not some, kind of mind trick, but it is it is.
It's a Jedi mind trick, Mark.
It's a Jedi mind trick, yes. But it's seeing that we are always doing some mind trick, and most of the time it doesn't, or a lot of the time maybe it doesn't serve us well, right? So whether it's the story of juggling a lot of balls, or the story of, oh, I'm going to have a horrendous day today, or the story of it's not enough, or I don't too much to do and not enough time. Okay, and and again, there may be some. I'm not at all taking away. In fact, I'm talking about the power of these stories and the power of the stories that we can tell ourselves, and and part of that is how we relate to pain, how we relate to difficulty, how we relate to things not going well. It's not about ignoring those or pretending, or but again, this kind of coming back to noticing story and the power of our stories.
I think it's helpful to think of it in terms of there's always a story there. The default story tends to suck.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
it tends to run to the negative, that default mode network, or it can.
Yeah, I'm in transition in my life right now, and we always are in transition, everyone, but there's transitions and then transitions, so I went from, for many years I was building and CEO of an organization, and I'm not in that role, and I can feel that I'm on some journey to something else, which hasn't emerged completely yet, and people often ask me, well, how are things going on this journey, and I could very easily paint a picture of great success about how things are going, and I could also paint a picture of horrible failure. That there's a lot of things that are that have not gone how I wanted them to, or things that I thought were going to emerge and didn't. And I also, suffer from, as many of us do, I have very high expectations of myself, and so it's interesting, and I actually think it's a valuable exercise to see our lives through the lens of success, and to see our lives through the lens of failure, and to see that neither of those stories are quite it, that there's something else happening here.
That sounds it, and that sounds more like it's closer to the truth, a more integrated, even way to look at things.
Yeah. Well, that, again, it's what I like about the journey, right? The journey, and that all these things that I'm struggling with this is all grist for the, things I can learn from and grow with and struggle with. And, not that I want them, right? We don't want this, we don't want that cyclops to appear, or that, that next, I love it too. It's like when we're hiking and we think we've reached the top of the mountain, and then we get there, and it's like, oh, we're not even close. There's another mountain to climb. So there's some sense of achievement, and, oh, I've reached this particular plateau, but there's the journey continues.
And would you, before we wrap up, what is the journey now? Is it around the book? Is it around the message? What's shaping up if it's not building up and becoming CEO of another company?
Well, I know that I love working with people one-on-one, doing one-on-one coaching. I love doing trainings and talks. I love both the business world, the world of accomplishment and growing things and getting things done, and I feel really honored that I get to bring in the contemplative piece, the mindfulness piece. So I know those are my activities, and I love writing. I'm working on the next book. But I also feel like there's some, I haven't quite found, who are the people that I most want to play with, and what form might this take? Will I join some other organization? Am I creating something? So I'm not forcing it. In fact, I had a really great phone conversation, a surprising phone conversation a few months ago with Jon Kabat-Zinn, in which he was really encouraging me to be patient and see what was going to emerge and unfold in this part of my life.
Well, it's exciting, and for anyone who wants to pick up a copy of the book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, I will put links in the show notes for this, and links back to your website. But for the people who are able just to listen now, Marc, where's the best place for people to find you online?
My website is marclesser.net, and it's marclesser.net. And yeah, I've got a lot of, starting to announce some workshops, 7 one day trainings, 7 practices of a mindful leader, one coming up in partnership with LinkedIn in October. And before that, I'm doing one in Berlin, a 1 day, 7 practices in early September, and it's all on my website.
Well, that's exciting. Well, I look forward to keeping tabs on you, and thank you very, very much for joining me and sharing your insights and a piece of yourself here today on the podcast.
Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate it.